Somebody touch my spaghetti!
It's that time again. Welcome to the 8th episode of this program. Since it's episode 8th, and there's that whole connotation going along with that number for some reason. So for episode 8, we're going to go a little bit more on an intellectual bent to our weekly conversations, or they used to be bi-weekly, now they're weekly, deal with it. And we're going to get a little bit more big brain, not as many jokes, not as much silliness, but I'll try to make it entertaining for you guys. So, with no further ado, let us get to this special big-brained edition of Radio Free Innsmouth.
Our own planet is only a tiny part of the vast cosmic tapestry, a starry fabric of worlds yet untold.
Those worlds in space are as countless as all the grains of sand on all the beaches of the earth. Each of those worlds is as real as ours. In every one of them, there's a succession of incidents, events, occurrences which influence its future. Countless worlds, numberless moments, an immensity of space and time. And our small planet, at this moment, here we face a critical
So, we're going to get into a little bit of music theory this week, folks, but I think some guys said that talking about music was like dancing about architecture, so if you'll give me a moment, I'll get my guitar set up to demonstrate what some of what I've been talking about. So if you let me warm up a little bit, I'd appreciate it. All right, get that plugged in there. Here we go. Fucking make fun of me online for my guitar skills, you son of a bitch. Can't fucking believe these idiots. Fucking assholes. Fucking make fun of me. Think you can make fun of me in a stream? Call me names on YouTube? Fucking dick. I'll fucking fight me. Fight me. Real life, fight me, you fucking cunt. I'll fucking kill you, you son of a bitch. Ah!
Stop it. Get some help.
So, most people know about major and minor scales. Major's the happy sounding one, major key. Minor's the sad sounding one, minor key. Here's what major sounds like. So that's pretty basic. There's a ton of music that's written in that. Here's what a minor scale sounds like. But some of you might not know that both of those scales have the same intervals in them. So intervals are the spaces between notes. So they have the same amount of whole steps and half steps between each note. And the other thing some people might not know is that each major scale has a relative minor scale. So you could use the same notes, the exact same notes from the C major scale, but if you started on the A note and just kept playing the scale as normal until you got up to the next A note, it would be the same thing as an A minor scale. What even more people might not be aware of is that there is not just major and minor. Depending on where you start any given scale at, there's kind of its own scale going on. These are called modes. So major scale is actually called Ionian mode, and here's what that sounds like again. So if you were to start on the 6th note of a major scale and just keep playing from there until you got up to the next octave of that 6th note, you would get a minor scale. That's how the relative minor works. But if you were to start on the 2nd note of the scale and go all the way up to the next octave of that 2nd note and use that 2nd note as your root note, you would get a different mode, and that mode is known as Dorian. Here's what that sounds like. So that mode might be the 3rd most used mode after Ionian or major and Aeolian or minor. You can hear it in a lot of old Baroque music. Bach would write stuff into Dorian mode, and also the YouTube channel Real Crusades History, one of their old theme songs used the Dorian mode, and it went a little something like this if I'm playing it right. I'm pretty sure I'm doing it right. Yes, Yes, Deus Volt indeed. So the third mode, you start from the third note of the scale. It's called Phrygian. You hear this one a lot in Spanish music and in metal music, interestingly enough, because when you play this mode on a guitar, you don't have to shift your hand position at all. The other ones, you usually got to move your hand up or down at least once to play the whole mode. So this one's Phrygian. Here's what it sounds like. So you hear that actually in a lot of Slayer songs. They use the Phrygian mode as well as the Mixolydian mode. The interesting thing about Slayer is that people usually think they're the least musically inclined out of the big four because their music sounds so weird, but the thing is, they're just using slightly different modes, and in fact, they're actually a little bit more musically literate than every other band in the big four when it comes to how they play their solos. You compare that to, say, Kirk Hammett from Metallica. He just kind of does pretty bog standard scale runs and does a lot of wah pedal on it to cover up that he's really not that good. And Megadeth obviously is like really good shredding type stuff, but again, he doesn't mess around with different modes that much. And Anthrax, well, they're the Chosenite band of the Big Four, and they use something else in their solos that we might be getting to at the end of this podcast. But for right now, that was Phrygian. We're moving up one step to Lydian. So some of you history buffs out there might have noticed that each of these modes is named after a different region of ancient Greece or Asia Minor. And the reason that is because that's kind of where all of white people music comes from originally. It's kind of that part of the world. So all white music kind of works within the matrix of that kind of classical theory. So it's very white to play in Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, or, as we're now about to hear, Lydian mode. So one step up from that, we get to Mixolydian mode. And now we are back to Aeolian mode, also known as the minor scale. And again, that one sounds like this. And finally, before we loop back around to Ionian, we get to the seventh mode. That one is known as Locrian, and it goes a little something like this. So there we go. That's the 7 modes of music. Western music, technically, but given that we kind of took over the world for a while, pretty much all the music in the world uses this unless it's specifically a foreign type of music. Like Indian music has its own scales, Japanese music has its own scales. But there's one other scale out there that I alluded to earlier talking about Anthrax. They use this one a lot in their solos, which aren't even that great, fam. So here is something known as harmonic minor. So with scales, you can actually maybe fudge around one or two of the notes, or perhaps you go up one way and come back down the other way, and then you'll get slight variance on them. That'll be like melodic minor or harmonic minor in this case. But the interesting thing about harmonic minor is that it's literally almost exactly the same as your regular old Aeolian minor scale. The only difference is in the second to last note, it's just shifted up half a step. It makes it a little bit more tense. So here's how a normal minor scale ends. So that's your basic kind of pentatonic thing, but here's how the harmonic minor scale ends. So the very interesting thing about the harmonic minor scale, have you guys guessed it yet? You might have heard it in a lot of movies. It's the stereotypical Middle Eastern sounding thing, even though it's not really actually having anything to do with Arabic or Persian music. But the harmonic minor scale is, in fact, the scale of Jewish folk music. So klezmer uses harmonic minor. All the Jewish songs you're going to hear in your wacky synagogue adventures use harmonic minor. And isn't it interesting that the Jewish scale takes the saddest sounding mode and then just tweaks it a little bit, does a little bit of tikkun olam to mess it up a little bit at the end, and oh, it's our own scale now, goy. You know, this is something I came up with in the shower, thinking about stuff, went out and played guitar and kind of did a little bit of that thinking emoji with your thumb on your chin and finger pointing up. I was doing that, but I just think it's kind of interesting given the history of Jews within Western classical music and how people like Schoenberg essentially did their utmost to kind of destroy Western music for a while. It's interesting that their scale in itself is an adaptation of a regular Western scale, the sad sounding one, and then they just mess with it a little bit. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting a little bit too big-brained. I promise I didn't smoke any pot when I thought about this. I don't do that stuff. It's bad for you. Don't do that anymore, kids. But think about it. Think about it. I'll see you guys around.
Oh, those fucking animals are are sitting in the front of their house again. I could see them. And I hate it. I hate it in my soul and in my eyeballs. Oh, why do they do that? I don't know, honey. They're queers.
Damn! Go easy! Oh, damn! Oh, damn! Damn!